Not all pain is worth enduring, but the right kind of pain is precisely what distinguishes those who give up from those who see it through. There are moments when people arrive at a silent crossroads, without fanfare, without collapse. Just a question that arises and lingers. Should I continue, or should I stop? This question isn't for the weak, but for those who have traveled far enough to understand that effort doesn't always lead to reward. Sometimes, the most courageous thing isn't to push a little further, but to admit that this path no longer leads anywhere. Seth Godin's book, The Dip*, was born from that very silence, not to teach you how to win faster, but to dissect a phase that most people experience but few correctly name. A phase situated between an enthusiastic beginning and a desired outcome, where motivation wanes, progress slows, and doubt creeps in daily. Most will turn away here. A select few remain. And that very distinction shapes their entire life, career, and value. The Dip doesn't blindly extol perseverance. This book can even be dangerous if read hastily, because it dares to state something that goes against common encouragement. That pushing harder isn't always the right choice. There are paths that don't lead upwards, only prolonging fatigue. There are pains that create no advantage, only eroding time and faith. And there are difficult periods that, if overcome, will lift you to an entirely different plane. Godin didn't write for the masses seeking safety. He wrote for those willing to confront the truth, that the world doesn't reward the average, and the market doesn't care about effort if that effort doesn't create distinction. This book sets a cold but fair standard. Only those lucid enough to choose the right game, brave enough to abandon what isn't worthwhile, and resilient enough to push through the toughest phase will have the chance to stand in an irreplaceable position. The problem lies in knowing if you're in a phase worth enduring or simply stuck in a dead end disguised by the words, "try harder." How do you differentiate between strategic perseverance and unconscious endurance? And more importantly, if you have to choose what's worth exchanging for many years of your life, this book doesn't answer for you. It merely forces you to ask yourself. And perhaps that is the Dip*'s greatest value. When the right questions are asked, the path ahead, whether difficult or easy, is no longer vague. Some mornings, I wake up feeling that everything has become muted, as if the whole world is silently waiting for something to happen, yet nothing truly does. I once thought the urge to give up belonged only to a weak few. But the more I experienced, the more I understood that it subtly weaves its way into every person. Not all day, not always obvious. But there are moments when the thought of stopping appears unexpectedly, like a faint cut on the serene surface of life. That's when we face obstacles, endure long days with no results, and experience efforts met only with silence or failure. The truth is, most people are accustomed to letting go. They just don't say it, or aren't consciously aware of what they've released. What's strange is that society, businesses, and even those closest to us tacitly expect you to give up. There's an invisible system that sets challenges great enough to make most people stop. In many industries, the market thrives on the majority quitting midway, because the reward is only for the few who persevere to the very end. I realize that victory doesn't belong to those who never give up, but to those who know when to quit and choose the right game. The story of Hannah Smick, a law clerk at the Supreme Court, left a deep impression on me. Each year, over 40,000 law students graduate in the U.S., but only 37 are chosen to clerk at the Supreme Court. Many would attribute that success to luck. But the truth isn't that simple. Hannah wasn't just intelligent and diligent. She also knew how to eliminate numerous other options to focus all her energy on a single goal. Many people started alongside her, but most diverged somewhere along the journey. Seeing the immense cost, they didn't drop out of school or abandon their studies. But they silently relinquished the ambition to become top performers because the path was too thorny. I used to read motivational phrases like, "Quitters never win and winners never quit." But reality is far different. Many successful people owe it to knowing when to quit. They didn't persevere blindly, but chose to leave paths that couldn't lead them further. The difference lies in this. They concentrated all their resources on one single thing, instead of spreading their energy across too many things, each ending up mediocre. Success isn't the result of never giving up, but the result of knowing when to abandon what's no longer worthwhile. Interestingly, the rewards society bestows upon top performers are many times greater than for the rest. The market doesn't distribute benefits equally to everyone. It's willing to funnel all the glory and advantages towards the most exceptional. I was once surprised to learn that the top person in a certain field often receives rewards 10 times, even 100 times, greater than someone ranked 10th or 20th. This inequity isn't random. It's a consequence of how people choose and value things in life. Whenever we need to make important decisions, we invariably lean towards the best option. If treating a serious illness, few seek an ordinary doctor. Everyone wants to see a leading specialist. When traveling, hardly anyone chooses a decent hotel. Everyone asks where the best, most famous places are. When recruiting, businesses always target the brightest candidates, willing to pay a high price to retain exceptional talent. Rewards thus accumulate for a very select few, those who dare to break through and become number one in their world. Today's world no longer has mass markets where every product or individual has equal opportunity. Instead, there are countless niche markets, and each niche has its own best. Whether you're a doctor, engineer, singer, or small retailer, as long as you're the best in the world your customers perceive, you hold a decisive advantage. That world doesn't necessarily have to be vast. It merely needs to be the community you target, the group of people you serve. Excellence is subjective, measured by the perception of those seeking a service, product, or skill. As the number of choices becomes almost infinite, people tend to narrow their selection to number one. Diversity doesn't make people want to try more. It makes them fear making mistakes, wasting time, effort, and results. They always ask, who's the best here? What's the top choice? Thus, the rules of the game favor those who accept the pain and pour their efforts into breaking away from the crowd, rather than settling for mediocrity. Some believe that being well-rounded and good at everything is enough for success, but the reality is quite the opposite. Those who are generally competent in all areas are often left behind by those who are exceptionally outstanding in a single field. No one hires a doctor who's just okay in every specialty. They seek the best for their specific ailment. No one wants to listen to a musician who can play many instruments well enough. They choose an artist who masters a single instrument to its peak. There are times I sit and wonder why society favors so few. Why do rewards, admiration, money, and opportunities all flow to those who reach the top, while the majority receive quietly fragmented portions, sometimes even oblivion? The truth isn't that they're luckier, but because the harsh rules of the market always prioritize the leader. Among hundreds of thousands of choices, everyone gravitates towards number one because it offers a sense of security, the expectation of differentiation, and superior value. I recall the ranking of popular ice cream flavors. Vanilla always topped the list, far outstripping others in both sales and influence, even if the subsequent flavors weren't much worse. Or take any lackluster film week where the top-grossing movie far surpassed numerous works below it. Just look at the music market, best-selling books, even bottled water brands, and you'll realize the leader often receives rewards many times greater than the second-place contender. And from the 10th position onwards, the benefits become so faint that no one even remembers them. The market never operates by evenly distributing effort. It moves like a torrent, sweeping all value towards the most exceptional, leaving only a few drops for the rest. That's not injustice. It's the inevitable outcome of scarcity. Scarcity arises because most players quit along the way. Only a very few have the grit to go all the way, creating a gap large enough that others cannot follow. The fewer people who overcome the challenge, the greater the reward. The top position becomes more secure. You can see this when you put yourself in the customer's shoes. Once faced with countless options, everyone hopes to choose the very best person, the safest solution, even if they don't truly understand the field deeply. The question always repeats in everyone's mind: who is the best person for me right now? That could be the best editor at a reasonable price, the most renowned doctor in the city, or even the best restaurant by the definition of specific customer groups. Therefore, the world is no longer a homogeneous whole but countless small worlds. Each world has its best, and the rewards go to that person. The concept of best in the world thus loses its absolute meaning. It flexes depending on each person's perspective. For one, their world is the city they live in. For another, it's an online community, a professional group, or simply a circle of friends with shared interests. You don't have to be globally number one. You just need to become the best in the world your customers, employers, or partners are looking at. That's enough to receive rewards far exceeding the majority. In recent years, as choices seem to have become infinite, I've clearly seen the fierce intensity of the race to be number one. Customers don't have time to try everything. They want to go straight to the best solution in a world of diversity and noise. Only the excellent will endure. All average value will be swallowed by the relentless waves of competition. The notion of being chosen because no one better was available is gradually disappearing. No one wants to be a temporary option when they have access to the best in their segment. The difference of a leader isn't in innate talent, but in their willingness to accept the price of overcoming every obstacle. They're prepared to endure days of no recognition, no rewards, no encouragement, just to wait until they've passed the toughest turn. That period challenges will, courage, and faith. Most will turn away, stop, or switch to another goal. Only a very few have the strength to hold on. Thus, the reward is deserved, not because they are the most talented, but because they are the only ones left when everyone else has given up. Once I met a friend who told me that being merely good was enough, no need to be excellent, but I realized that very goodness caused him to drown in a sea of people who simply completed tasks. No one remembered him, no one offered him big opportunities. The market is increasingly cold to those who only do just enough. Those who know how to break through are the ones who redefine the rules of the game. If you lead the game, you'll see that every small niche has its leader. Every game has someone who reaps the majority of the benefits. If you're the only one persistent and resilient enough to see the path through, all eyes, all rewards will belong to you. No matter how small that world, the important thing is to dare to choose and dare to let go, not to take on everything, not to try to be good at everything. That's also the greatest paradox modern society instills in us. The more you try to be well-rounded, the easier it is to be forgotten. Only when you dare to accept your limitations, choose one area, a small group, and resolve to become number one, will you truly have value, be sought after, and cherished by the market. Big rewards always lie behind big challenges, and they are reserved for the select few who dare to reach the very end of scarcity. I grew up surrounded by advice to study evenly, work evenly, and strive not to fall behind anyone in any aspect. School taught me that consistent grades were ideal. The community lauded versatile people who knew many things. I looked around and saw people everywhere striving to be well-rounded. Few dared to accept being truly good at just one thing. Yet, the truth that life teaches only to those patient enough to experience it is that no one is given major opportunities simply for being well-rounded. No one wants to entrust their assets, health, or dreams to an ordinary person in every aspect. They seek the best for their exact needs, even disregarding cost, time, or difficulty to reach that person. The story of the city's most renowned doctor, always with a full waiting room, isn't because he knows every specialty, but because he is the best in his asterisk field. Performing artists make their mark not by playing all kinds of instruments well, but by mastering one thing to the point where their personal signature is recognizable by sound alone. Small businesses that rise to dominate the market don't do so through versatility, but by concentrating all resources on a single product, a service entirely distinct from the rest. We grow up under the illusion that if we just diligently study and work consistently, success will eventually come. But the world doesn't reward those who are merely vaguely persistent. Rewards are reserved for those who dare to commit all their energy, time, and steadfastness to overcome every obstacle on the path to being number one. These individuals not only accept difficulty, they actively cast aside everything else, boldly refusing all mediocre options so as not to scatter their resolve. They understand that to stand out, one must first accept being obscure in countless other areas. Reality shows that if you're not at the peak of a certain field, the market will never grant you great privileges. The most exceptional always have the power to choose clients, projects, even competitors. They control the game, set their own rules, and are often remembered and referred to even after they've left the stage. Conversely, those who are merely good at everything become faint shadows in the background. No one is impressed enough to even name them. Some say you need to be versatile to adapt, to hedge against failure, but the more you try to embrace everything, the easier it is to fall into the trap of false security. The truth is, only those brave enough to let go can truly break through. It's the courage of someone who knows their limits, knows they can't be everything, and accepts being the best at one single thing. Society and the market will eventually discard all average value, retaining only what is most outstanding, most unique, making everyone mention it whenever that field comes to mind. I remember years of struggling with all sorts of opportunities, trying my hand at many projects simply out of fear of missing out. But after all that, it was only when I dared to choose one path, focusing all my energy, attention, and passion on it, that true results came. That's when I understood that success isn't for those who merely wait for the right moment, but for those who dare to step forward and master their own small world. Think back, what truly makes others remember you? What makes you the first choice, irreplaceable in the eyes of clients, colleagues, even loved ones? It's not superficial versatility, but depth in a field you choose to make the center of your life. Only when you become the best in that world will all doors open and all rewards truly come to you. Remember, the world doesn't need more people who are just good enough. The world needs those who dare to stand out, dare to choose, dare to let go, dare to endure challenges, ready to break through to the peak in their chosen world. That is the only path for all your efforts not to be wasted, for your name, value, and passion not to drown in a sea of people who just do, live, and think uniformly. Only those who go to the very end of their chosen path truly make their mark. When you understand and accept this, all fear of being left behind will dissipate, giving way to the courage to move forward. Once you understand that the world's rewards flow only to the top, a cold question begins to emerge. Not loudly, but persistently. If you can't ultimately reach the number one position, why cling on? This question isn't meant to insult anyone's efforts. It merely forces us to confront the truth. Time is finite, energy is finite, human attention is also finite. No one has enough of everything to be number one in many places at once. Therefore, every choice to hold on means countless other choices are silently sacrificed. I've witnessed many people remain on paths with no light, not because they believed in the outcome, but because they feared the feeling of leaving. They tell themselves that perseverance is a virtue, that patience will be rewarded. But deep down, they know they're just delaying a difficult decision. There are paths that don't lead upwards, only prolonging at a mediocre altitude. On such paths, each additional step doesn't bring you closer to the peak, it merely drains more of your time. Leaving such places isn't a betrayal of ideals, it's the only way to preserve one's sanity. I say this directly because it needs to be said directly. If you are on a path where the ultimate reward isn't great enough, isn't worth the price, then stopping early is an act of courage, not weakness. There are turns that look very promising from afar, but the deeper you go, the more you realize things are stagnant. There, effort doesn't accumulate, experience doesn't create an advantage, and each passing year only makes leaving more painful. Clinging to such circumstances simply because you've invested too much is a familiar but dangerous psychological trap. What keeps many people stuck for so long is the noise in their own heads. The clever self-justifications, the seemingly rational reasons to stay, like it's stable, it's safe, it's not the right time. These reasons aren't entirely wrong, but they hide a more uncomfortable truth. We fear admitting that the current choice has hit a ceiling with no more potential for breakthrough. All efforts are just spinning in place, and there, mediocrity doesn't cause immediate pain, but it silently erodes ambition. I recall a man named Jake. From the outside, everyone considered him successful. He had held many important positions within the same company, trusted, valued, and well paid. But precisely because he had tried almost every role, he became pigeonholed in the organization's eyes. Everyone thought they knew who Jake was, what he could do, and where his limits lay. That invisible ceiling didn't descend in a day. It was built little by little with each promotion that seemed like progress. Leaving in that case wasn't giving up, but the only way to be reborn in a new context where the past hadn't yet defined the future. It's important to distinguish that abandoning a method doesn't mean abandoning a goal. Some grand strategies remain valid, but the smaller paths to execute them have become outdated, no longer effective. Clinging to a method, simply because it's familiar, is a subtle form of laziness. Those who go far aren't stubborn, they are flexible enough to change their approach without losing their direction. Halting a tactic to protect a long-term strategy is the act of a clear-headed person. There's a paradox I've learned after years of observation. When the pain is great enough, when everything becomes unbearable, people reach a very special state. That's when they have nothing left to lose. And precisely then, they dare to speak the truth, dare to act differently, dare to put options on the table they never dared to consider before. I once saw a man named David standing on the brink of quitting his job after years of stagnation. Instead of leaving silently, he chose to speak frankly, clearly outlining the current limitations and proposing an entirely new path. His readiness to leave gave his words weight, and as a result, he not only stayed but also moved into a greater challenge truly aligned with his capabilities. If there's one thing I want to emphasize here, it's clarity. Not all pain is worth enduring, and not all perseverance is worth praising. Perseverance only has meaning when it leads us towards a worthy position. If you cannot become number one in your chosen world, the wisest choice isn't to vaguely try harder, but to decisively leave to dedicate all your energy elsewhere. Success doesn't come from enduring longer than others on the wrong path, but from realizing early which path is worth seeing through, being clear-headed enough to leave paths that don't lead to the top. Another truth quietly but sharply emerges. Quitting isn't an impulsive act, nor is it a reflexive escape from difficulty. True quitting is always a deliberate decision made after squarely facing reality. That reality is sometimes harsh. Not every effort accumulates, not every journey opens the next door. There are paths where the longer you go, the greater the price, but the reward at the end remains unchanged. I've seen many people confuse perseverance with endurance. They stay in a position, a project, a choice simply because they've grown accustomed to its suffering. This familiarity makes them believe they're doing the right thing, when in fact they're just avoiding the insecurity of having to start over. Familiarity creates a form of false security, enough to make people accept mediocrity for a very long time. And it is this acceptance that silently kills all potential for breakthrough. The hardest part isn't realizing you're stuck, but clearly discerning what to let go of and what to keep. Many people fear quitting because they think once they let go, everything will collapse. But the truth is, what needs to be kept isn't every specific step, but the overarching direction. Long-term goals don't necessarily have to be tied to a single method. Conversely, those who go far are often willing to cut off ineffective options to protect their core objective. There are times when prolonged stagnation lulls people into a false sense of security with seemingly persuasive reasons. Things will get better, just a little more time. Everything is stabilizing. But if you look closely, you'll see no signs of a breakthrough. There's no accumulation, no new advantage, no differentiation being formed. Each day that passes is merely a faded replica of the one before. In such a state, time is no longer an ally but a thief of opportunity. I always believe that a right decision rarely brings immediate comfort. Leaving a familiar place always comes with pain. But that pain has a clear form and an end. Conversely, remaining in a no-exit situation creates a subtle, prolonged, nameless pain that slowly erodes self-belief. The wise choose to endure a short pain to avoid an endless chain of suffering. There's a paradox few want to face. When you are truly ready to leave, you gain the greatest power. Because then you are no longer bound by the fear of loss. You can speak frankly, act differently, propose bold options that you previously avoided. When there's nothing left to hold onto at all costs, you begin to act with absolute honesty. And that very honesty often opens doors that silent forbearance never could. I've witnessed this repeatedly. Those who dare to put all their options on the table, ready to leave if there's no path forward, are often viewed quite differently, not because they exert pressure, but because they force the conversation to become genuine. In that moment, all social pretenses fall away, leaving only the core question: is this path still worth continuing? If the answer is no, then leaving doesn't diminish you. It returns to you the power of choice, the right to redefine your own value in a different context. If the answer is yes, then the readiness to leave also helps you move forward with a new, clearer, stronger standing. You no longer continue due to inertia, but because you've carefully considered and actively chosen to stay. What I want to emphasize here is decisiveness. The world doesn't reward those who hesitate too long at crossroads. Every prolonged, ambiguous decision drains energy without creating new value. Only when you dare to make a clear statement to yourself, either continue with full commitment or leave without looking back, will you truly regain control of your journey. And precisely at this point, a crucial boundary begins to emerge. There are challenges that should not be avoided, because overcoming them will lead you to an entirely different position. But there are also paths that, no matter how long you walk them, will not change the outcome. Recognizing this boundary isn't instinctual. It's the result of observation, reflection, and daring to face the truth. Once you've done that, quitting is no longer an end, but the beginning of a more worthy choice awaiting you. Having passed through that decisive moment, having squarely faced whether to stay or to leave, one final misunderstanding needs to be dispelled. Many think that quitting is a state of standing still, letting go and waiting for something new to happen. But the reality is quite the opposite. The opposite of quitting isn't waiting. It's recommitting, not blindly, but committing to a thoroughly considered direction with a new, stronger, more resolute approach. There's something I've learned after years of observing people and organizations. Difficult periods don't stand still. They react to your actions. Your approach can make things worse, prolong them, or conversely, shorten them and open a way forward. Many people sit and endure, believing that given enough time, everything will improve on its own. But time isn't responsible for solving your problems. Only the right action can do that. When fatigue hits its limit, when all old options reveal their constraints, that's when people easily reach a special state, having nothing left to lose. It sounds negative, but in fact, it's the most powerful moment. When you're no longer concerned with maintaining an image, a position, or fragile security, you can say what needs to be said, do what needs to be done. You can break old assumptions, try paths never accepted before. The daring in this moment doesn't come from impulsiveness, but from lucidity, after considering everything and realizing that staying the old way is the greatest risk. I've seen large organizations endure for decades precisely because they dared to do something seemingly ruthless. They constantly eliminated obsolete products, stopped initiatives that didn't provide long-term advantages, and accepted short-term losses to protect a greater path. They didn't love their methods. They were loyal only to their goals. As a result, resources weren't leaked into inefficient directions, and strength was concentrated to overcome truly valuable challenges. Individuals are the same. Clinging too long to a role, an image, or a way of doing things, simply because it once worked, is the quickest way to self-limit your future. Only when you're willing to let go of what you have do you open up the possibility of becoming a different version of yourself. Not a safer version, but one more aligned with your true capabilities and true ambitions. The hardest thing isn't the action itself, but clearly seeing the nature of the situation you're in. There are paths that are difficult because they filter people, and thus overcoming them brings great value. But there are also paths that are difficult simply because they are poorly designed, lack accumulation mechanisms, and offer no proportionate rewards. On such paths, the more you try, the more exhausted you become, without getting closer to what you want. Distinguishing these two types of difficulty is the most crucial skill in any long-term journey. I don't believe in unconditional endurance. I believe in conscious choice. Staying or leaving can both be the right decision if it stems from squarely facing reality, not from habit or fear. When you decide to stay, stay with full focus, with a new strategy, ready to dismantle what no longer fits. When you decide to leave, leave decisively, without lingering regret, without looking back to justify yourself. Not everyone should continue, and not everyone should quit. The important thing isn't what you do, but that you understand what you're doing and why. When that understanding is deep enough, every decision feels lighter, even if the immediate consequences might be heavy. And it is from that clarity that the next path begins to open, no longer vague, no longer based on blind hope, but on a clear-headed and responsible choice for your own life. What position are you aiming for, in what world? When that question is asked seriously, the concept of best suddenly becomes much less ambiguous. Best isn't a self-proclaimed title, nor a leaderboard hanging on a wall. Best is always determined by the person who needs you at the exact moment they need you, with very specific conditions that sometimes even they can't clearly articulate. People often confuse absolute excellence with suitability. They strive to perfect themselves according to abstract standards, thinking that if they are just good enough, they will eventually be chosen. But reality operates in reverse. People don't look for the perfect person, they look for someone who can solve their problem. And thus, best is always relative, intimately tied to the context, needs, and limitations of the decision maker. When someone needs to hire a collaborator, they don't scour the world for the most excellent person in a global sense. They look for the best person within their accessible range, in the language they use, within the time frame they need, at a cost they can accept. The chosen one isn't number one by every metric, but because they are the best option in that specific world asterisk. It is this specificity that determines everything, not glamorous descriptions. The world, therefore, isn't a vast, continuous whole. It's fragmented into countless overlapping circles. Each circle has its own rules, its own standards, its own evaluation methods. A recruiter's world is different from a customer's world. A city's world is different from an online community's world. And the crucial point is that each of these small worlds still only has room for one best, not due to lack of space, but because people have very limited capacity for memory and trust. I realize that when someone says they want to be the best, what they need to do isn't to expand their ambition infinitely, but to narrow it down to be sharp enough. Narrowing isn't self-limitation, it's focus. When your chosen world is clear enough, all efforts begin to accumulate in the same direction. You no longer have to convince everyone, you just need to become irreplaceable to a very specific group. Many people fail not because they are incompetent, but because they choose a world too broad, where they are constantly compared against irrelevant benchmarks. They try to please everyone, and the result is that no one truly remembers them. Meanwhile, those considered the best often do the opposite. They reject most opportunities to protect their consistency. They accept not fitting in with the majority to become the obvious choice within a narrower scope. This requires a very specific kind of courage. The courage to say no to worlds that aren't theirs, the courage to accept being invisible in many spaces just to be clearly seen in one single place. But it is this choice that creates a sustainable advantage. When you're identified as the most suitable person in a specific world, competition decreases, trust increases, and rewards come more naturally. The more I think about it, the more I believe the right question isn't how to be better than others, but how to be chosen. Being chosen isn't about shouting louder or showing off more. It's about appearing in the right place at the right time with the exact value the other person is looking for. When you clearly understand the world you serve, you don't need to prove too much. Suitability itself speaks for you. Only when you clearly know the world you're aiming for can you honestly answer the question of whether to continue or stop. Only when you understand the standards of the selector do you know if you're getting closer or going astray. Best, after all, isn't a distant peak. It's the position given to someone who clearly understands where they stand and through what eyes they are being seen, clearly understanding the world they are moving towards. Another question begins to emerge, silently but unavoidably. Do I truly want to be the best in that world? Because each world demands a different price. There are places that seem small, yet to be at the top requires immense sacrifice. And there are glamorous, crowded places where the price of being remembered is many times harsher. Not everyone is willing to pay that price, and that's perfectly normal. The problem only arises when people don't dare to admit their hesitation, when they want to keep all options open while simultaneously hoping to be seen as excellent. The world doesn't operate that way. To be chosen, you must accept not being chosen in many other places. To become the best in one world, you must let other worlds pass without holding on. I've met highly intelligent, very diligent people who always hesitated to clearly define where they belonged. They took more classes, did more work, tried more things, hoping that one day everything would connect into a complete picture. But that picture never appeared because the pieces weren't intentionally chosen, lacking focus. All efforts became scattered, and when that scattering persists, no one has enough patience to wait for you to become excellent. The one considered best is often not the one who does the most, but the one who rejects the most. They refuse tasks that don't reinforce the position they want to build. They turn down attractive opportunities that don't align with the world they've chosen. Each such refusal makes their image in others' eyes clearer. And that clarity is the foundation of trust. One thing few realize: ambiguity is the greatest enemy of being chosen. When you don't clearly define who you are, what you're good at, and what world you fit into, Others won't know where to place you in their decisions. They might see you as good, but not good enough to remember first. And in a world overflowing with choices, not being remembered first means being overlooked. Clarity doesn't come from saying more, but from what you stop doing. When you cease pursuing directions that don't serve your core goal, the path begins to straighten. Every action, every small decision contributes to solidifying the position you're building. Others don't need to hear you explain too much. They perceive that consistency over time. Here, a great responsibility rests on each person's shoulders. No one else can define the world you belong to for you. No one can bear the cost of focus for you. If you choose wrongly, you pay the price, but if you choose nothing at all, the price is even greater. Because then you lose not only the opportunity to be at the top, but also the agency in your own journey. The deeper I delve into this thought, the more I believe that becoming the best was never a goal for the majority. It is for those lucid enough to see their limits, brave enough to accept trade-offs, and patient enough to stay in their chosen world until others have no better option. It's not an easy path, but it is a clear one. The difficulties ahead are no longer vague threats but specific challenges to overcome. When you know what game you're playing, in what world, and for what reason, then even when you hit the toughest patch, you still know why you are there. It is this understanding that will guide you forward, not with blind hope, but with a choice considered to its very core. Clarity has been established. A subtle yet significant change begins within people. Difficulties no longer take the form of anonymous threats but become familiar landmarks on the journey's map. You no longer ask, "Why am I enduring this?" but begin to ask, "How do I get through this?" This question is entirely different. It doesn't seek solace but seeks a way forward. At that point, you also realize an uncomfortable truth. Becoming the best in a specific world isn't a reward from general effort, but the consequence of very specific decisions, repeated over a long time. There are no miraculous breakthroughs, just ordinary days where you do what needs to be done, even when no one notices, even when results haven't appeared. It is that chain of days that creates the gap, and that gap leaves others with no better alternative. I've seen many people stop just before they began to receive recognition, not because they lacked ability, but because they hadn't truly accepted the price of being at the top. They wanted recognition, but not the monotonous repetition. They wanted results, but not the solitary process. The world doesn't bargain on this point. It only grants the highest position to those willing to endure repetition longer than others, while still maintaining precision and consistency. The irony is that once you become the obvious choice in a world, you no longer need to prove yourself much. Work comes to you, invitations appear more naturally, doubt subsides. But to reach that state, you must pass through a phase where everything is uncertain. No one promises, no one guarantees, no one confirms that you're on the right track. You have only one compass, the alignment between what you're doing and the world you've chosen. Here, discipline becomes more important than inspiration. Inspiration might get you started, but discipline is what keeps you there long enough. Discipline isn't loud or romantic, but it creates reliability. Others trust you not because you speak well, but because you show up consistently, work steadily, and don't disappear when things get tough. That trust accumulates slowly, but once formed, it's very difficult to replace. Also during this phase, many people start looking at other worlds and wonder if they should change direction. Comparison always arises, especially when seeing others getting more attention, moving faster, or seeming to have an easier time. But each world has its own rules, and comparing different rule sets only creates noise. If you have chosen the right world for yourself, patience will yield advantages that outsiders cannot see. I don't believe in chasing every opportunity. I believe in building a position. Opportunities come and go, but a position remains. When you have a position, you don't need to chase opportunities, they will find you in more suitable forms. And that position is only built when you are focused enough, persistent enough, and decisive enough not to be pulled off course by fleeting temptations. Here, a circle of thought closes. You started with the question of whether to continue. You journeyed through the truth that if you can't be at the top, you should leave. You clarified the world you're aiming for and understood that best is always contextual. And finally, you realize that once you've chosen the right world, what remains isn't to find shortcuts, but to go long enough, deep enough to become the irreplaceable choice. From this point onward, the journey is no longer about self-discovery, but about protecting your choice. The challenges ahead will no longer ask if you're good enough, but if you're steadfast enough. And that is when another concept emerges more clearly than ever. A phase where most people give up, but those who clearly understand where they are and why they are there will choose to stay. It is at that boundary that all true differences are made. As the story concludes here, what lingers isn't an easy-to-hear piece of advice, nor a formula to apply tomorrow. What remains is an uncomfortable but necessary truth. Most of life's pain doesn't come from failure, but from pursuing the wrong thing for too long. This book doesn't teach you how to win faster. It forces you to look squarely at a far more important question: what is truly worth your price? The biggest lesson isn't about whether to persevere or quit, but about knowing how to distinguish between the two. Perseverance isn't a virtue if it only keeps you stuck on a path that leads nowhere. Quitting isn't a sin if it frees you from a choice with no future. This book overturns the familiar belief that effort will always be rewarded. More realistically, it says that only efforts placed in the right spot have meaning. Another lesson, more subtle yet sharper, is the perspective on excellence. Excellence isn't trying to be the best in everyone's eyes. Excellence is clearly understanding whom you serve in what world and accepting the trade-off of everything that doesn't belong to that world. Focus, not versatility, is the foundation of sustainable value. When you are clear enough, the market will do the rest for you. The book also forces us to confront personal responsibility. No one else can decide for you whether to stay or leave. No one can bear the cost of procrastination for you. And no one will take away the reward if you are brave enough to choose correctly and see it through. Growth isn't about knowing more things, but about daring to eliminate what no longer serves the path you've chosen. Perhaps after listening, you might feel a bit uncomfortable because this book doesn't offer comfort. It doesn't promise that everything will be okay. It simply states that if you choose the right game, the pain will have meaning. But if you choose wrongly, the pain will only prolong without creating any value. The difference lies in a very early, very lucid decision that many avoid because they fear confronting themselves. What game are you playing, and does that game truly allow you to become the best? If not, are you continuing out of hope or out of fear of leaving? And if you had to be absolutely honest, what is it you've known for a long time but haven't dared to admit? If you find yourself in those questions, perhaps this book has fulfilled its purpose. It doesn't demand immediate change, only that you begin to see more clearly. Clearly see the path you're on, clearly see the price you're paying, and clearly see the possibility that another choice, though perhaps more frightening, might be more worthwhile. Not every path is worth seeing through to the end, but once you've chosen the right one, don't leave too soon.